John Fitzgerald Kennedy, often called JFK, was born on May 29, 1917, in Brookline, Massachusetts, in the United States. Unlike many other leaders who started life in deep poverty, John was born into a large, well-known family. His father, Joseph Kennedy, was a successful businessman and diplomat, and his mother, Rose, came from a respected political family. Their house was full of children, laughter, strict rules, and big expectations. From the beginning, John's world was not one of financial struggle, but one of pressure to achieve, to serve, and to live up to the Kennedy name. His riches at birth were opportunity and education. But what he did with those advantages is what made his story special. Even though the Kennedy family was wealthy, John's childhood was not always easy. He was often sick as a child and spent many days in bed. He suffered from various health problems, including serious back pain and other illnesses that doctors struggled to fully understand at the time. While other boys played outside, he sometimes lay in bed reading books about history, heroes, and wars from long ago. This forced quiet time trained his mind. It made him think deeply about courage, sacrifice, and leadership. His body was weak, but his imagination grew strong. John came from a family that believed strongly in education. He was sent to good schools where teachers demanded discipline and hard work. Sometimes he was not the top student, but he was curious and competitive. He liked to debate, to ask questions, and to challenge ideas. His older brother, Joe Jr., was often seen as the one who would be the future political leader of the family, and John sometimes stood in his shadow. But these comparisons pushed him to define himself in his own way. Instead of copying others, he started to develop his own interests. Especially in history and world affairs. When John grew older, he went to Harvard University, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. At Harvard, he studied government and international relations. He was fascinated by how nations made decisions, how wars began, and how peace could be built. During these years, the world was moving towards a huge conflict, World War II. John watched the news carefully and wrote a senior thesis about why Britain was unprepared for war. That thesis was later turned into a book, showing that even as a young man, he had a sharp mind and the ability to turn ideas into something useful for others. When World War II finally broke out, John Kennedy did not choose to sit safely at home, even though his family's status could have protected him. Instead, he joined the U.S. Navy. He trained as a patrol torpedo boat commander and was eventually given command of a small boat called PT-109 in the Pacific Ocean. In 1943, his boat was struck and badly damaged by a Japanese destroyer. 2 of his crew members died in the collision, and the survivors were left injured in the dark water. In that moment, John's leadership was tested in real life, not just in books. Despite his own injuries and chronic back pain, Kennedy helped lead his surviving crew to safety. He towed a wounded sailor for hours through the ocean by holding a strap in his teeth as he swam. Finally, they reached a small island. For several days, he and his men struggled to stay alive, looking for food, water, and a way to signal for help. John carved a message on a coconut shell and managed to get it delivered to nearby allies. Eventually, the crew of PT-109 was rescued. For his courage, he received military honors. More importantly, he had proven to himself and others that he was not just a rich man's son. He was a leader who could act bravely under extreme pressure. After the war, the Kennedy family experienced both hope and tragedy. John's older brother, Joe Jr., died in a combat mission, and the dream that he would be the main political figure of the family ended suddenly. In this painful moment, John began to step into the role that his parents once imagined for his brother. He entered politics, first running for Congress and later for the U.S. Senate from Massachusetts. He worked hard on the campaign trail, shaking hands, giving speeches, and listening to the concerns of ordinary citizens, workers, fishermen, small business owners, and families. As a young politician, Kennedy faced doubts and criticism. Some people thought he was too young, too inexperienced, or just a handsome face relying on his family's money. But he answered those doubts by studying issues deeply, preparing carefully, and speaking clearly. He spent long hours reading reports, listening to advisors, and writing his own speeches. His health problems did not disappear. He often had to wear a back brace and manage pain silently. Yet he tried not to show weakness in public. Behind the easy smile and energetic presence was a person who struggled, but refused to quit. In 1960, John F. Kennedy decided to run for President of the United States. He was only 43 years old at the time, which made him one of the youngest serious candidates in American history. Many people believed that older, more experienced politicians had a better chance. His opponent, Richard Nixon, was the sitting vice president and a strong debater. The campaign was intense, and the whole country watched carefully. For the first time, television played a major role in a U.S. presidential election. In the famous televised debates, Kennedy appeared calm, confident, and prepared. While many viewers thought Nixon looked tired and uncomfortable, Kennedy's message was one of energy and hope. He spoke about a new frontier, encouraging Americans to face the challenges of their time with courage, creativity, and unity. He talked about ending poverty, defending freedom around the world, and exploring new possibilities, including space. Young people especially felt drawn to him because he looked and sounded like a different kind of leader. Optimistic, modern, and ready to move forward. In a very close election, John F. Kennedy won and became the 35th President of the United States, and the youngest person ever elected to that office at that time as president. Kennedy was immediately tested by difficult events. One of the most dangerous moments was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The United States discovered that the Soviet Union was secretly placing nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from American shores. If the situation was not handled carefully, it could lead to a nuclear war that might destroy millions of lives. Kennedy had to choose between attacking, which could trigger war, or finding another path. His advisors offered different opinions, and the pressure was enormous. Kennedy chose a middle path. He ordered a naval quarantine to stop more missiles from reaching Cuba and demanded that the existing missiles be removed. At the same time, he kept secret channels of communication open with the Soviet leader. For several days, the world held its breath as war seemed to be just a misstep away. In the end, through careful negotiation and firm but measured action, the crisis was resolved peacefully. The Soviet Union agreed to remove its missiles, and the United States quietly promised not to invade Cuba and later removed its own missiles from Turkey. Kennedy's leadership in this crisis showed that true strength is not only about weapons, but also about wisdom, patience, and the courage to avoid unnecessary war. During his presidency, Kennedy also inspired people with his words. In his inaugural address, he famously said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." This simple sentence expressed his belief that citizens should not only demand benefits, but also give service. He called on Americans to volunteer, to help the poor, and to take responsibility for the future. Under his leadership, programs like the Peace Corps were created, allowing young Americans to serve in developing countries and share skills in health, education, and agriculture. He wanted people to see themselves, not as passive observers, but as active builders of a better world. Another big dream Kennedy put in front of his country was the dream of space. Exploration. At a time when the Soviet Union seemed to be leading in space technology, Kennedy challenged his nation by saying that the United States should land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade ended. This goal sounded almost impossible in the early 1960s, but he believed that setting a bold target would push scientists, engineers, and citizens to reach higher. Although he did not live to see it happen, his vision helped guide the efforts that led to the moon landing in 1969. At the same time, America was struggling with deep issues of racial inequality. African Americans faced discrimination in housing, schools, jobs, and voting. Civil rights leaders organized marches and protests to demand change. Kennedy's response evolved over time. At first, he moved carefully, but as events became more urgent, he began to speak more clearly in support of civil rights. In a notable speech, he called civil rights a moral issue as old as the scriptures and as clear as the Constitution. He proposed legislation that would later become the Civil Rights Act, aiming to end segregation and ensure equal treatment under the law. Despite his achievements and promises, Kennedy's time as president was tragically short. On November 22, 1963, while riding in an open car during a visit to Dallas, Texas, he was shot and fatally wounded. He died the same day. The news shocked not just the United States, but the entire world. People cried in the streets and gathered around radios and televisions in silence. The sense of loss was not only for a man, but for the hopes and dreams that he had come to represent. Yet, even though his life ended early, John F. Kennedy's impact did not disappear. Many of the goals he set, like space exploration and civil rights progress, continued after his death. His words remained in history books, speeches, and in the hearts of millions. People remembered him as a leader who encouraged them to dream, to serve, and to be brave in facing global challenges. His story showed that even someone born with advantages must still prove themselves through choices, risks, and sacrifices. For your viewers, the story of riches in John F. Kennedy's life is not just about coming from a wealthy family. His true riches were his courage under fire and war, his calm leadership in moments of international crisis, his ability to inspire people with his words, and his willingness to call citizens toward higher ideals. He used his education, status, and talents not simply to live comfortably, but to push his country and the world toward a more hopeful future. His life teaches that no matter where you start, poor or rich, the value of your life is measured by what you give, not just what you receive.